Hi everyone, welcome to the new episode of Humans of Authenticity. Joining me today is Zachary Gray from the American Evaluation Association. He's also working at Bucklin. And Zachary is a scholar of the DELP class 2023-25 where I met him.
Yeah.
Welcome to my channel, Zachary. Thank you so much
for
sharing your time with me. Would you like to introduce yourself to our listeners first?
Absolutely. You covered some of the main points. So my name is Zachary Gray II. My pronouns are he, him, and I am the Senior Membership and Operations Manager at the American Evaluation Association with Bucklin. And I'm really excited to be here with you, V. V is, she already mentioned we're in the same DELP cohort, and I saw her the very first time and what she was wearing, and she's incredibly stylish. For those who do not look at the video component of this podcast, and I said, okay, cool. I love that. She's very stylish. I love being in this cohort with her. She's bringing her full self to this space. I'm very into that. So it's really good to be here. Thank you for having me.
I appreciate it. And likewise, I always really enjoy looking at Zachary's accessories, and he's wearing this beautiful yellow necklace with him on a grey top. I love the example.
Thank you.
Let's talk a bit more about yourself.
Yeah.
Could you share with me 3 things you love about yourself?
Sure. So for my birthday, which is at the end of December, I actually asked each member of my immediate family to say one thing that they love about me. And as I was thinking about reflecting about my time on the podcast today, I thought those were the perfect things to share. My mother and father said in so many words that they love how I am unapologetically myself. My sister said that I love how generous you are. And my brother said that you are incredibly good at organizing things. And I thought those things really resonated, especially as a Capricorn, that organization piece. You see me, you see the work and my attention to detail. That's great. And then, of course, being generous and being seen as generous is incredibly important to me because people recognize that the actions are speaking louder than the words when it comes to the generosity. And, it's especially important coming from my little sister you've met my little sister, actually. She is 23 this year? Yeah, 23 this year. So I'm 35. So I'm kind of a millennial. She's Gen Z. So I've been playing a really important part in kind of her journey of exploring education and coming into the world, into this new world that's much different than what our parents went through. So I'm excited that she sees that I'm passing back to the up and coming generations. And it's more than just in like a monetary way, but also in, how we build relationships, connections, advice, tips and tricks so that she can better navigate this world. And I think that really spoke to my heart, that she sees that as something that I'm giving back to her through all of my lived experiences. And then of course, I owe it to myself to be unapologetically myself. So, and that's just kind of what my brand is. And I highly encourage you all to do the same thing. It's a lot of fun and it really is freeing. So, for that to be evident to my family as things that they love about me and like the things, what a crazy thing to ask folks to say on your birthday. But, all of those things were incredibly meaningful for them to share back with me. And I took that to heart as I was listening to Lizzo's Birthday Girl in the background, celebrating and eating my birthday cake.
That's really sweet. 2 things I'd like to ask from that story. So you mentioned that you and your sister are from 2 different generations.
Yes.
And I met her, like, very smart girl, very sweet.
Incredibly
She
intelligent
knows
girl.
what she wants to do, and that's really rare I don't want to say it, in the younger generation. That made me feel so. What's your observations in terms of the generational differences between you and your sister in terms of, the behavior, the conduct, the thinking, the work ethics? I
think it's an interesting question because our dynamic is also, we have to name the kind of dynamic we have. I am the eldest child, she's the youngest child. So there's going to be some dynamics there that are at play that may not necessarily kind of be bridged by the generations, right? That's where I'm having that challenge of answering that question because we grew up in the same house. So we don't differ so much in the way that we approach things. But going back to that access piece, she has people who have kind of lived through those experiences already. I think which is incredibly beneficial for her to have because it's much closer in terms of lived experiences than, say, the astronomical growth in the cost of education and the access to mentorship and kind of the pitfalls that were also happening for the generation prior to my own. So she has access to things kind of not only at her fingertips, but like directly in that family dynamic to really help inform her pathway. I'm trying not to take too much credit from her because she's incredibly intelligent, but I do admire her openness to advice and mentorship and a desire to ask questions. I think that's something that I can speak for myself personally, wish I had done a lot more of as I was coming up and acknowledging the importance of mentorship. And just for me, that has really reaffirmed that I have a responsibility to be giving back to the generations that are coming up. And recognizing that, hey, I really could have used some of this additional mentorship and I really could have needed someone to go, okay, hey, I think you should just go specifically in this direction, talk to these people. They have the resource for you to do these things, but also for you to be open and open about the possibilities and don't kind of pigeonhole yourself. So I hope that effectively answers that question.
That's really
It's
cool.
hard to sort of say from a generational standpoint because I'm very firmly millennial. She's very firmly Gen Z, but in terms of like maybe a generational stereotype, it's we also grew up in the same house and we have a different kind of dynamic. So you have to kind of name those nuances as a part of acknowledging what those differences are. But I can't take too much credit away from of what she's kind of done on her own, and I have to give tons of credit to also our parents for really building strong foundations, also learning from kind of where Zachary may have pitfalled and coming up in the world and say, okay, this is how we're going to shift the way that you're going to approach the world because this is not a thing that's working for your brother right now.
Yeah, I think you just hit the nail in the head right there when you say it's not just the generational labels, but it's also the nuances, the context, and the dynamic in the relationship between the two of you. And again, as a side note, this is where I think we can explore this called dynamic in our diversity and inclusion work. Because when we talk about, as soon as we talk about diversity and inclusion, we start talking about different groups of people, trying to put them into a room and try to ask them to make it work without considering the nuances and the context and the
Right.
dynamic between these individuals. And I think that's what I'm seeing as the gap of inclusion and diversity work at the moment. We haven't really built a safe enough environment so that everyone can open up as individuals, but we're using label and we're using groups of different peoples and try to force it, so then the relationship become a little bit unnatural from the get-go.
Right.
Yeah, whereas what I'm hearing from your story with your relationship with your sister is because you guys growing up together, regardless of the generational gaps, you still have the same understanding and the same context, and that bring you closer to each other again, regardless of the generation gap. Because between
Right.
X and Z, there is also the Y in the middle, right?
Which is technically us millennials, I believe, the generation Y. Yeah, and I think that's important to know because there are things that work and there are foundations and things that can be taught to the previous generations. But our generation has a responsibility to also make space to allow for that nuance, allow for evolution, and allow for us to do some more tailoring so that we can be the most responsive to the communities that we serve, so that we can be the most inclusive to communities that we serve, and that we can also keep our eyes open to the way that the world is changing. I think our generation should always be sort of mindful for our generation, my generation, millennials, the future. Those who are leading right now should be mindful to not be in tunnel vision. I think you hit the nail on the head, and you kind of touched on this a little bit, that we kind of were told to, this is just how it works. And you just need to exist. This is how you play the game, and this is how the system works. And a good thing to sort of note about Gen Z and to observe there is that they are being an active part of challenging that. So you're seeing them saying, if this job is not vibing correctly, I'm going to leave it. If this is not being responsive to the needs of people or being inclusive, you're not really walking the talk, you're just doing lip service, I will leave. And that's powerful. That kind of desire to and willingness to disrupt is incredibly powerful, and it's valuable. And that is how, just thinking about us as professionals and the spaces that we occupy, That is the only way we will continue to evolve and exist, because the future has no interest in maintaining old guards and old systems that gatekeep access to resources and tools to their generation and to other folks that are sort of operating at the fringe, or existing at the fringe, I should say.
Yeah, that's really cool. Very insightful. Thank you. The second thing I want to ask from your story about yourself is
Yes.
the bit about unapologetically yourself.
Uh-huh.
And I mean, to my listeners, once you see Zach, you will not forget how he looked like and how he showed his full self to us. But to our audience, can you
Yes.
describe that part of unapologetically, cannot say the word, unapologetically yourself for us?
So for our audio listeners, I am fat, Black, loud. I present femme. My pronouns are he, him, and that's who I am. That's my identity. That's what I bring into these spaces. That's what, is going to, and I'm incredibly skillful and wonderful at my job. I'm excellent with community. I'm excellent at building relationships and being with people. So, and that's how I show up. And bringing my identity to these spaces are incredibly important for a couple of different reasons. That's just who I am. Period. That's period. That's just on period. And that's what I thinking about, that sort of generational gap. Now we're expanding on that. Gen Z is very much so the same way, and they want to be in environments where they don't need to assimilate or conform in order to exist within the systems that exist for them to make a living for themselves, and that inhibit their ability to be inclusive and create access for others who look just like them. And that is me walking the talk every single day. So, thinking I like to share the story about how when we first met at DELP and I saw you wearing what you were wearing, and it wasn't what our society has deemed as like a traditionally sort of professional presenting sort of kind of garments. I believe it was a traditional Vietnamese dress that you wore that day with the tulle. I thought it was gorgeous.
It's a full
And
rainbow skirt.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it just, when I saw you, I said, okay, cool, great. There are other people who are really walking the talk and presenting as their authentic self and bringing their identity to this space. Your visibility, our visibility, my visibility is incredibly important, not just for the purposes of living unapologetically myself. I owe that to myself every single day. I owe that freedom to myself every day. But also, there are others just like you who are trying to enter that same space as their authentic self safely, without the threat of sort of violence, without the threat of being siloed or isolated in that space, devalued, look differently because of their identity. And you are a part of demonstrating what the future of executives look like.
Yeah.
And they are from different backgrounds. They are intersectional, they represent different identities, and all of that is incredibly important to how we execute and do our roles and how we serve our organizations, because our organizations are not monolithic. They don't look like one, our members are not monolithic. They don't look like one type of people. There have been old guards that have allowed that to happen for a very long time, and the future generations and us cannot allow that to happen. We have to serve all of our members and everybody who wants to be a part of these communities. So I say all of that to say that that's incredibly important, because it allows for people to see that there is a pathway and that there is a community to have access to. There are people who are not only who have seats at the table and can show you that there are seats at the table, but they are also making ways for others to eat who look just like you and from the same intersections and backgrounds like you. So being unapologetically myself is just how I choose to and have to enter the world. It is my duty to myself and to the community that's behind me, and to the ancestors, Martha P. Johnson, Sylvia Rivera, who fought, and our roots of resistance in the LGBTQIA plus community and the things that they had to do. It's my duty to them as well.
So was there a time when you felt that you were not yourself enough? Because what I'm hearing is you are today was, this sounds very transactional, but bear with me. The way
Yeah.
you portray yourself today is a product of a lot of self-reflection, self-awareness, and then retraining your thoughts so that you can put yourself out there without being scared of being judged or being talked about. Was there a time before the version that we are seeing today of you?
Absolutely, V.
Tell me more about that, please.
Absolutely. In previous roles, and I won't get into any specifics around that, constant comments about how I presented, who I am, how that was impacting my ability to advance in the world. Very conformist environment that also, I think, did not value a diversity of perspective, diversity of identity. It was very, very buttoned down. And you pay direly emotionally for that. And you're thinking about that sort of generational shift, understanding millennials kind of were told you this is how you have to operate in these systems in order to play the game. Now, I try not to sort of harbor ill will to these folks because they also were other people of color who have to they're trying to articulate to me that you have to participate in a certain way to get ahead and advance in this kind of industry, this kind of place, and they're also offering up their own fair share of microaggressions in that regard. What I really found disappointing is their willingness or their unwillingness, I should say, to disrupt that instead of advocating for a diversity of identities and perspectives and presentations in this space, they were actively advocating for assimilation and dressing down and leaving identity at home, not acknowledging and recognizing that that is kind of what makes me great at who I am and what makes me great at what it is that I do. And this is what I bring to make sure that we maintain some diversity on this team. Because thinking back to who we serve, there are other people who come into this space who look like me, and I help these people feel safe. And so you pay for that emotionally, and you have your rough conversations with your friends about those experiences. And then I got to leave that space. I got to leave it. And I came to where I am now, where all of that was celebrated.
Nice.
All of that was celebrated. And then there's also some curiosity around it too. How do we, okay, cool. Not traditional in a lot of ways, in the ways that our society has said traditional is, but that really contributes to the diversity of this team, the diversity of perspective, the things that we can learn, what kind of gaps in knowledge that we have that you would be able to fill because you understand the nuances of a certain community and presenting as you are, and then also how that helps create sort of safe spaces as a part of people's journeys. I think where I have had professionally where I've sort of been able to sort of live this the most is through AEA's Graduate Education Diversity Internship Program. It's called JEDI. There is no Star Wars connection whatsoever, but it's for those who are underrepresented graduate students who are extending their capacity to evaluation to learn more about culturally responsive evaluation. So recognizing that culture and context are inherent to the evaluation process, and those who are from underrepresented populations in the field. And what I love so much about being a part of sort of running that program for AEA is being a part of, I think I've graduated about 100 plus alumni, and program is in its 20th year this year.
Wow. Congratulations.
Yeah. Oh yeah, so I've done about almost 11 years of it, but being a part of so many people from different sort of intersections and communities and identities, professional journey. And I have many, many stories of people just, being grateful for my presence, for the love and care that I give to that space, and being able to openly articulate where I come from in this space and who I am in this space, and recognizing that as of deep value to participating in this professional space and coming as you are to this space, because this is how you are going to, all of that is baked into you and embedded into all of the skills that you have in order to execute this work. So, of that 100 plus alumni, I've seen 1,000,001 identities, and that program has given me the opportunity to really be able to shed some of that, quote unquote, traditional societal professional drag and be able to openly present as myself and be able to name and speak explicitly about myself and where I come from.
That's really cool. I find that when we run a program like that, from an an association staffing perspective, it's always give me joy not only to see the participants succeeded, but also a time for me to learn together with the participants.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Their feedbacks and their discussions are my lessons. One of the perks in working in this industry, right?
Yeah, and I think I just credit that program so much for being able to allow me to kind of reflect upon myself and go, it really is okay to be in this space and say these words, these things that have been taboo to say about that we as a society have said are taboo to say in spaces about your identity. You know, at the top of this, I said I was Black, fat, queer person, femme presenting at one point in this podcast conversation. 11 years ago, that wouldn't have been a thing I would have been willing to say out loud in a professional space. And, I have to give credit and being where I am in my organization, the American Evaluation Association, Smith Bucklin, for allowing me the space to be able to do that, to say it out loud. And now I have the opportunity to give that back and create more community space to be more, and to allow for, to demonstrate that safety we talked about. Right. And affirm others that are coming right behind me so that they know that there's a pathway. You can exist as you are. You do not need to leave your identity at the door. That's important in this space.
Of course.
You're demonstrating how it's important in this space. And you have an advocate, right? You have an advocate.
Yeah. And thank you for shouting out to the network around you who have supported you to become
Absolutely.
today. And I think this is a good cue for us to move to the keyword discussion.
Yeah.
So I provide you with a list of 12 to choose from. Which one do you select?
I selected 2, and we're going to probably just volley between the 2 of us, sounds like, for our conversation. But I chose community and fitting in. And I think we've been touching on that quite a bit during our first little half hour together. So I'm excited to unpack that with you.
Tell me a little bit about community and how that impact you and who you are today.
Community is important because it really helps you find your people. It helps you find belonging. It helps you find affirmation in this very scary world where we're all kind of navigating and trying to figure out who we are and what we're supposed to do. And community is incredibly important to make some of that process, to help guide you through that process. My favorite part of my job is that I get to be a part of people's professional journey. I get to help people find community. I get to help people find that affirmation. I get to help people find safety. I get to help people find access to resources that are otherwise gatekept from them, either explicitly or through just the systems that we kind of operate in this world. So that's why community is incredibly important. And it really makes this life even more worth living. When you have people in chosen families and, blood families and, people that you have connected through, even just as a person who sews and knits through the knitting community, people who get you, and people can help you along your learning journey. And your network and community are really important things for you to be able to lean on as we navigate this life. But whenever there is a period where you do not know and you're unsure and you need validation or affirmation, to be able to have an existing community of people who have either been there before, the elders, or people who are on that same journey with you, it makes things a lot more manageable for you and more enjoyable for you. And that exists among a variety of different contexts, right? So there's the professional world, and we have that through DELP. We have that through, I started the LGBTQIA plus affinity community at Smith Bucklin. So that's a space where we've created some communities. So they exist in this sort of professional setting. JEDI is another example of where we're creating a community and this ecosystem of, JEDI alumni, folks who are getting ready to introduce our 24th cohort. So I'm very, very excited about that. And then you also have it in your personal space. So if you have some sort of outside hobby or thing that you're really interested in doing, there's a meetup group for that. I live in DC where we are the land of activity. If you want to do competitive karaoke, we got that. If you want to do competitive bocce, we got that. If you want to do I don't know, a balloon art making, we got that. And so you go and you do these things and you're all connected by this sort of common thread and this common interest and topic. But that community, that human experience and human connectivity is really what really enhances that desire and enhances that willingness, the desire to participate, and helps you really lay the groundwork for what your journey could be.
In one of the examples you mentioned earlier, you
Mhm.
said that the community help you define your people, help you with affirmation.
Mhm.
Can you give me an example of when the community around you help you with that affirmation piece?
Yeah, I think a really good example is when I started the LGBTQIA plus affinity community at Smith Bucklin in 2021. I am no longer the chair. Am I allowed to do shout outs on this podcast? And
Yes.
shout out to Amber Welch. She is the newest chair of the affinity community, and I'm excited to talk about her because she is somebody who has been my right hand as we've kind of guided through my first year of chairing the group, because that's where I found some of my first sort of points of human connectivity in creating that affinity community. When we first started it, we didn't even really know if there was a need or if there was a desire to continue to do that kind of work. And when I was approached to start it by my executive director, Anisha Lewis, I initially said no. I said, I have a lot of other, you know me, I have a lot of other projects. We have a lot of other projects going on right now. I really don't have the time or the bandwidth to do it. And then after a couple times asking, I said, okay, I'll do it. And the caveat was, we'll get it started and then someone will take over it. And after the first couple months. And 2 years later, I was still sitting in the chair role, and not because there was no desire for someone else to sort of sit in that role, but it was because I had really found, if I can be not metaphor, if I can be obvious, like, my calling, right? A space where I was really affirmed in my duty to provide mentorship, to create community, and to help create guidance. And I talked about a little bit earlier in this conversation, to demonstrate a pathway for the folks who were the up and coming generations. And just getting back to sort of what you were asking around how that sort of created affirmation for me is, when I walked into it, I didn't think that that's what I was going to get out of it. But I think what ended up happening was, as we went through the process and we built all this community and we're just sort of laughing and even just having the space where you can just come and kiki and eat, I think it really affirmed that I had found a place where these were indeed my people. And it was really important for me, critical for me, to be creating this space of community for folks. So, I'm excited to have Amber in this new role, because she's been along for that entire journey. And it's just a clear demonstration of sort of the two-pronged way that we both found affirmation in this community space. I found it and being asked to create it, being kind of resistant to it at first, but realizing that this is my responsibility. This is where I should be. These are my people. I need to be here, helping to cultivate and foster this really strong community space for folks that feel safe and affirming. And then we also have someone who had an opportunity for leadership development, and who was really invested and also who saw the vision, who I can bounce things off of, who I say, okay, there's clearly someone out there, clearly other people who are invested here. Let's work and collaborate together to make this the space that it should be. And if you need to tell me, Zachary, that I did crazy, we're not doing that. That's the person I can bounce off of. So now she's sort of sitting in this leadership role, and it just goes back to what I mentioned earlier. All of that is a part of I enjoy being a part of people's journeys.
It sounds like that experience changed you. Can you describe yourself before that experience?
Yeah, I think it gave me a lot of insights to what effective leadership looks like and how to actually create spaces in a organized, intentional, and collaborative way. There are challenges from starting something like that from scratch. And, Zachary has a tendency to want to boil the ocean when it comes to those ideas. But, it really helped increase my ability to be more collaborative with folks. So it really helped beef up my leadership skills
Nice.
and my ability to collaborate, my ability to identify needs, to listen, to shift the way that I'm thinking so that we're being the most responsive to the community. And I'm certainly not suggesting that's what was prior to that But, I mean, you have to, when you're building structure, there are a lot of sort of moving pieces that are happening. So it really was influential in helping to develop my leadership skills and being able to collaborate with folks more effectively and more intentionally, and also in a more digestible way. So, reflecting as a leader on what the actual ask is and what the responsibility is. I think when I first started the community, a great example is, I'd said, okay, cool, I'm not taking this on to third parties. That is, I'm not, I'll do pride. That's incredibly important for us to do, but we're going to make it real meaningful. And, thinking back to my conversations with Amber, so, and folks who were joining the community, it's like we really need to shift the way that we approach this community space because we're trying to do a lot of work and putting the community part second.
Okay.
Right. So that allowed me, kind of taking that feedback and being able to pivot the group to be more, let's put the community piece first, let's center that just joy piece first, and then we'll do more digestible, work pieces and outputs and outcomes and deliverables as kind of the secondary piece. All of these things can exist in the same ecosystem. But, that really allowed me to really think about as a leader, what am I asking? What am I actually asking? And is it actually reasonable? And am I also collaborating and reflecting with folks on if what I'm asking is reasonable? So I've grown a lot there professionally as a leader through that experience.
Nice. So you mentioned intentionality a couple of times.
Mhm.
During that experience, what was your original intention, and how did you honor that intention during that experience?
So when we first took on that responsibility, my initial intentions were, I'm not here to just throw parties and do lip service. This is the thing that happens. Like, I want folks to be able to take away education. What did you learn this month from Pride? Are you actually engaging? Are you not just participating in rainbow capitalism? I had a lot of things, a lot of ideas around advocacy. How can we give back to the community? How do we bring folks in? How are we really walking the talk when it comes to our goals and objectives around diversity, equity, and inclusion? So those were some of my kind of initial intentions. And we got to those things. We
Nice.
got to those things. We definitely did. Our Pride celebration last year, where our theme was brick by brick, which was to honor the first brick thrown in Stonewall way back in 1969. And the idea was for our colleagues it was kind of like Epcot, to visit different sections of the setup location where they were all in these like interactive stations, and you would have to participate in some sort of learning journey in order to get a Lego block in order to build a rainbow flag out of Legos. I purchased, I think, 300 and no, that's a lot of Legos. That's a part of that learning journey. And like to this day, people are still talking about all of the things that they learned during that time. There was a section on LGBTQIA plus joy, things we've contributed to, the world and community in terms of like pop culture, literature, et cetera, et cetera. In spite of sort of the active annihilation and, desire to erase the LGBTQIA plus community. And that's something that came out of that centering the community piece. We need to make sure that we are talking about the joy that we bring to the world. There are a lot of things happening to us too, and people need to learn that as well. There are a lot of things that are happening in the world. I think the ACLU is tracking almost 500 plus anti-LGBTQIA plus bills being considered across the country. And that was kind of a huge piece of education that we wanted to give to our colleagues. We're encouraging folks to make sure that they're registering to vote, bringing folks up to speed on kind of the contemporary issues that are impacting the LGBTQIA plus community, where we came from, the joy that we give to the world, and being able to do it in like an interactive, hands-on building Lego kind of way. And eventually you would build out like the inclusive pride flag, which has the black and brown stripes in the pride flag. And then we also did, speaking about the intersectionality piece, we have a BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color affinity community as well. And we were really intentional about building intersectionality into the celebration. So how do we also celebrate the Black and brown Indigenous people who also contribute greatly to the LGBTQIA plus community, but aren't centered in a lot of conversations. And what we actually contributed in that component, I love talking about this specific one, was a crossword puzzle that had a lot of AAVE and language that comes from ballroom culture that's contributed from Black and brown queer people. And let me tell you, they were focused on getting that puzzle done. But all of that was a part of the learning journey. And to this day, people say, wow, we learned so much during that time. We had an inclusive conversation with a colleague of mine who talked about trans issues and kind of the bills and legislation that are actively targeting the trans community. So we achieved that advocacy piece, right? Those were the intentions that I sort of set up with. But then we also melded it with really making sure that we center that community piece. And that's kind of my tagline when I talk about the affinity community. Before we do anything else, this is where you come to eat. This is where you come to be celebrated, affirmed, it's safe, you can be yourself, and this is your space, this is where you hold the power. And the way that we sort of shifted to prioritize that was every other meeting would be focused on work. Anything that we're working on initiative-wise, there's like a subgroup out somewhere doing it, will be tabled for these other conversations that are prioritized around us, just having a space, hour in the middle of your day to just connect with your colleagues who identify as LGBTQIA+. So that's kind of how I just sort of, that's how we were able to sort of transform. That's a great story about how we started and what the intentions were. Collaborating with the folks who, know this group exists, there's the stated sort of intentions in charge, but let's shape this space together. How should we look at it? And if the piece of feedback is, there's way too many things that we want to do that are related to just output, and there's nothing that is here that is really around fostering and cultivating culture and community, we need to shift that around.
Yeah.
And we need to make sure that that's centered. And we made that pivot. And that's how we've been really effective. And that's how we've been able to bridge, connect people, identifying opportunities for professional development. I am actively campaigning and beating the drum for DELP for the LGBTQIA plus affinity community and the BIPOC affinity community. Really all of that kind of mix of things that are a part of this community in this space that people want to go to and want to be a part of to be affirmed.
That's such a great success story. And I really admire how strong you stay connected to that intention and how strongly you understand the intention and the purpose around that so that you follow through to the end. So congratulations on such
Thank you. I'm so proud. I love talking about it because I'm so proud of it. And I'm
Of course.
so proud of kind of what people get out of it, right? And then we keep talking about me and how I found my space and how I found my people. It's even more rewarding for me to know that I was a big part of creating that space. And a lot of that is all connected to showing up and being able to be unapologetically myself and recognizing that I have a responsibility to the future generations so that they can do the exact same things. And so that I'm clearly also indicating that we're walking the talk in this space.
Yeah.
Right. Because there's you being the lonely only and you being the lonely only and not sort of executing some sort of role to help bring up the future generations and making them safe to exist in this space as well is a disservice to the community. In my view, and I get there are also a million nuances involved. You have to name those things.
Yeah.
Because everybody's not in a space where they can do that, right? I'm talking about things that I live in Washington, D.C. I'm in an organization in the community that greatly values diversity, equity, and inclusion, and being able to show up as your authentic self and also be able to sort of speak truth to power. But everybody's not in a space like that. And you have to name that. And, but it's good to be able to speak about this on this podcast because hopefully they do find a way to be able to inject some of that into where they are.
Yeah.
Or if nothing else, they feel validated and affirmed that they can still exist as their unapologetic self.
So let's move to the second keyword because you sort of prompted already. Now you have on one hand being yourself unapologetically, and then on the other hand, you wanted to talk about fitting in. So help me understanding the connection here. I mean, with fitting in and community, that makes sense to me because I'm entering to this new community. I have to start from my part so that they can see to them so that it's easier for them to accept me. But how does that connect with being yourself unapologetically?
I think my view on it is that you can still fit in because the proof is in the pudding when it comes to the work. And the proof is in the pudding when you can clearly demonstrate and articulate that your identity is intrinsic to what makes you successful, what makes you a good leader, what makes you collaborative, what makes you inclusive, what makes you prioritize diverse lenses, what allows you to be also able to articulate that in order for us to be the most responsive to our clients, our members, our organizations who don't look one way, we need to have a diversity of perspectives. So you fit in the sense of the work that you do and your excellence in the work that you do, while also naming the power of how you differ and the power of difference and diversity and what it contributes to the team. So my view of fitting in is not necessarily in the way that you need to do these things and strip these parts of you down in order to assimilate and exist in these spaces. My view of it is I'm this and I'm all of this and I am Black, queer, femme presenting, and I'm excellent at my job. And this is what our members are responsive to. And this is also bringing in new audiences that are a part of this industry in this field. They see that there is some diversity. They see that there's opportunity for different identities and different intersections in this space, and that they have an opportunity to find their belonging. There's a person there who is also committed to helping them find their people in their community. So that's kind of my vantage point on it. Is that helpful? Does that make sense to you?
It does. But when we talk about differences, then we start talking about the unknown, thinking about how people don't like unknown, how people don't like things that are different. So if you step into an environment where people don't like differences, do you feel the pressure on you to conform to that scenario, or how will you deal with it? So say if a kid's rocking up to school for the first day after they change school midterm, for example, what's the best way for that kid to show themselves so that the new classmate accept him? In that dynamic, who should start the first step? Should the community start the first step to accept the new kid, or should the kid start the first step to talk in these classmates' language to start the first conversation?
I think that there is going to be space for us to meet in the middle without this new kid compromising who they are in this space. I think there is definitely something in merit to understanding the language of the space that you're entering, understanding the culture and community that you're entering. And then on the flip side, this culture and community also needs to be able to name that they need to change. They need to be open to the unknown. They need to not be scared of getting uncomfortable. And if they're not ready to evolve or to become anything different than they are, and eventually they'll get left behind in this world that is rapidly diversifying and changing and becoming more inclusive. So when it comes to pressure in those spaces, I definitely go in and I do want to understand the culture because those cultures exist. I have to be responsive to what those cultures are. But if I'm being invited into this space or I'm joining this space, we have to meet somewhere too where I don't compromise myself. And if gets to the point where I'm being asked to conform or to not be able to be my authentic self or to strip parts of me away, it's not a space I need to be in. And this is a little different from like a kid, right? Who doesn't have a choice. I'm a grown man. I have a choice to not be in those spaces because there are spaces that will accept and love who I am and the perspective that I bring and from all of my intersections and from my intersections and my identity. And my track record speaks for itself. I believe it was Beyonce who said, check my credentials. And I don't mean to sound boastful, but it just goes back to that kind of the proof is in the pudding, right?
Yeah.
All of these pieces of my identity and who I am are a part of what has made me successful. I did not get here by accident. I did not get here without community or network, right? And there are tons of successes that are under my belt that I can clearly articulate. and are clearly demonstrated, even just looking at a CV, looking at a resume, right? So if the space is willing and open to accepting a diversity of different people, and I recognize that they have a gap too, and not just tokenizing, right? But like we are not reflecting what the world looks like, and we need to be able to serve the world or whoever our clients, members, what have you are, and our teams need to look like that. Because thinking about that unknown, you don't know about all of the identities and groups that you serve. You might know some of the technical pieces, right? But you know where they come from and how that's intrinsic to their work and how they got here professionally. We don't know all of that. So we need to have a diversity in order to be able to properly capture and tap into that knowledge and expertise.
Nice. So what I'm hearing is it sounds like it takes two to tango. As an individual, we should start with researching the community, at least knowing the language and their conduct. But as the community, as a groups of people, we also should make the environment a bit more welcoming, a bit more acceptance, so that if everyone, every individual feel like they have a spot in that community. So from a community's perspective, and this can be a cliche question, who bear the responsibility turn that community into a welcoming community?
I think the leadership has a responsibility of doing that. And this goes back to kind of what I was mentioning earlier. They have to be ready to want to do that. They have to be ready to want to get uncomfortable. They have to be ready to disrupt. They might have to also accept some uncomfortable truths about themselves, about their demographic, the unknown. Who are we not serving here? And do we have an organization and a system and community that is actively built to keep those folks away? And if we're comfortable in that space, why are we engaging somebody from a diverse perspective? We don't have a desire to do that kind of thing. So the leadership has to want to do that. They have to want to disrupt. I think folks like me also take on a lot of labor, bringing folks along in that process for change. And, you know, there's only but so much bravery and work that we can do if the group is not willing to change and be more open and inclusive. And that is really horrible for them. As I mentioned before, that will get you left behind in this rapidly diversifying world. And I'm glad I had an opportunity to talk about the labor of being someone who is different and needing to kind of get into these spaces and understand their language, but also identify where we need to disrupt and be more inclusive and seeing, you know, gaps. There's also sort of a emotional toll.
Yeah.
A labor toll that comes along with that work. And it's important for everybody. I'm looking at you all, for those of you who are not looking at the video component, but feel like you're taking on that labor, make sure you're checking in with yourself. And making sure you reflect, make sure you have community to lean on, you know, to talk to about, hey, I'm having this challenge. This group is being real resistant to this change that we're trying to implement. We try to be more inclusive and responsive to. We're trying to be better about our DEI work. But right now it's stopping at lip service and it's not actually impacting community work, but it's being real resistant. We're not seeing, you know, these changes. It's a lot. It's a lot. So, you know, make sure you're checking in with yourself and make sure you're being realistic with yourself too about what change is possible.
I'm hearing a lot of emotional connection to this work, especially because we are part of that change agents.
Yeah.
So obviously it will take a toll not only on your day work, but also on your emotional level. So thank you for calling that out.
And it always reminds me of, like, you know, I'm living the life that so many of my ancestors fought for, and there's so much more to fight for, and they don't actually get to witness it. So, you know, there's so much more resistance and work that needs to be done, and some of it that I won't see in my lifetime. But you know, when you take on these positions of leadership and you sit in these roles, it is your responsibility to cultivate environments for change, and then also develop the future.
Nice.
As much as we are the future, there's a future right behind us. And they have their eyes wide open to what is needed for our organizations, and they need the opportunity and the resources And it's up to us to make sure that they have the opportunity to tap into that.
That's powerful. I do have one more questions in this sort of scenario and topic. We talk about the role of the leaders coming to make it becoming a more welcoming environment. What about a non-leaders staff person? What can you do individually to influence the leaders to realize the need for change?
A really great question. And, one part of that is making sure that we have a leader that actually is creating space for that person to be able to contribute, that's open to them being able to contribute. So also my message to folks who are leaders on this podcast, make sure you're creating space that allows for dissent and that allows for a diversity of perspectives. I think as leaders, we need to always be reminded that we don't know everything. And if we are open to evolving and building and being better organizations, we need to be open to ideas that we quite simply do not know. And that is the importance of having diverse teams from different perspectives and identities and spaces. And, that we all come together in a commonality and expertise, knowledge, et cetera, or at least in the subject topic area. But then there's also a diversity of perspectives and lenses that you will simply not be able to solo fill. It's just not how our organizations work. So make sure that you're really creating, this leader needs to make sure they're creating a space for that person to be able to do so. No, if that does not exist, again, this leader is actively tamping down the desire to change. I think this person can maybe think about how they reflected in the work and that outputs that they do for this work, for this organization. Specifically what that is, I can't speak, there are a million different sort of ways to kind of frame that and model that, but I think some incremental small change is helpful. And I think that will hopefully result in some feedback and responsiveness from your client, your organization that sees that as an ability and as a desire to evolve and be more inclusive as an organization. And that's of course all hypothetical. And us leaders have a real responsibility to create environments for collaboration. Period. Period. You might have a good handle on the work, but you have to consider the ideas that you don't know and the ideas of others, because from where they come from, it's unique and important to the work that you're doing.
Thank you for that. We are getting to the end of the conversations. Before we move to the last part of this episode, is there any other stories you would like to share about community or fitting in?
I think I talked a lot about the LGBTQIA plus affinity community and how proud I am of being a part of helping to cultivate that community and to a thriving community as well. And I think we talked a lot about what the outcomes are. So I think that's a really good example in a professional setting, but also, and really kind of a hybrid setting, because it's this mix of professional and personal, right? It's, bringing this, exactly what we've been talking about, bringing your identity and your true whole self into the workspace. You also have this environment to just kind of talk about things that are not work related during our time together. And then you also have these times where we're talking about what's the learning journey, how we're building roadmaps and learning for our colleagues. So I think that's a really great example of building community. I can't stress enough how important community is. And it's directly related to our life journeys, right? I think I hope I'm not using this out of a term, but no one man is an island, I think is what the terminology is. So the people that you connect with and meet along the way, so long that you're open to being just developing, not just professional development, but developing, are what is going to make your journey map broader, your perspective broader, your knowledge and connections more fruitful, and really will lend to some clarity in your life.
I like that.
Really lend to some clarity. And going back to something we talked about at the very top of the podcast, mentorship is so important. And creating environments for mentorship and coaching and bringing people along and being able to say, I've been there, I've navigated this space, I've navigated the politics. Here are some things that were helpful for me. If I could turn back time, I would have identified a mentor at the top as soon as I was in college. So being able to give that back to the LGBTQIA plus affinity community, being able to sort of mirror that in my work with the Graduate Education Diversity Internship Program, shout out Jedi, and being able to do that with my little sister as she navigates and she enters the workforce, lessons learned from my time, mirroring the things that the wonderful foundation that our parents built for us, but here are the things that I can help inform from you because we're closer in generation. This is how the world is happening now. These are how things are kind of changing. And even from a giving back perspective, I get that too from you all in the DELP cohort. We have Sheila, who is also a couple generations removed. She's further along, and we kind of come together and we collaborate and we talk about the differences in our generations, what we're taking from each other's generations, and how we're using that to help mold and shape our purpose, and how we're using these experiences and these connections in our community to gain more clarity for where we're going in our journey.
Nice. Thank you for
It's
that.
incredibly powerful. Yeah.
Thank you for that. So before the episode, I asked you to find an object.
Yeah.
You or say something about you. Can you share that object with us?
An object that says something about me. Yes. Okay. So what I have here is this little garland of crochet flowers.
That's so cute.
That as a project that I'm working on. So in the pandemic, I picked up so many hobbies, but the things that really stuck were plants. I taught myself how to sew, and I taught myself how to crochet.
Nice.
And this is a part of a much larger project that I've been challenging myself to do. And I started off, I think the first thing I made was this giant duster. And then progressively, I'm adding more and more challenging projects for myself. And I think I like talking about this because it connects directly back to the journey that I've been on, finding community in sewing, because you need help, and crocheting, and who is building these communities either virtually or in person. Who do I go to ask questions, bounce ideas off of? And then also unlocked that I love to challenge myself. One day I saw something on ASOS that said, I'm not paying $80 for that, I'll make it myself. And I taught myself how to crochet in July. And I made, I think 10 projects in like the last 6 or 7 months. But it really helped reveal that I like working with my hands. I like the process, and I like the gratification of a finished product and investing in the work.
Do you feel that in those moments of crochet, your mind get a bit clearer? I find myself when I'm doing those sort of handy project, crochet or playing with my music instruments, after that sessions, my head gets a lot clearer because I didn't really think about anything else. I'm just looking at my fingers and the work I'm doing at that point in time. So it's like a meditation process, pretty much.
It acts a lot, yeah. If it's like a calming process, it's calming. I don't know is the word I would use, but I do find it very gratifying.
Nice.
That I'm working on something that I found a thing to work on that is not like work related. And people ask me all the time, "Are you going to start selling the things that you create?" And I don't really want this to turn into work, right? I love having this thing that allows me to use my hands, that challenges me to make sure that I'm problem solving and thinking critically about what this is supposed to look like. And then also to quite simply just follow instructions. And, as not that old, I'm only 35, but as I get older, I do enjoy making sure that I'm doing these in practice of these things. So I'm keeping myself sharp, and I'm challenging myself to do new things and to do interesting things and things I love. And also things that I get to wear because, these things tend to be expensive or they do not come in my size.
And I always love, again, the ensemble and the outfits and the accessories that you put together each time we meet up. We're getting to the last question of this episode. Thank you so much for staying with me for this far. What's next for you in the coming 12 months?
Let's see, in the next couple 12 months, I'm going to be deeply embedded in studying for the CAE. I just attended the CAE kickoff at ASAE 2-3 weeks ago, which was wonderful. Helped me uncover what my plan is going to be. I've never been scared of test taking. That's something I've never been afraid of. But we'll see how this goes. We'll see how it goes. So I've been really invested in accomplishing my professional development hours that I need to take that CAE, and I plan to take it this December. And then also just a lot of wonderful stuff with the American Evaluation Association. We're getting ready to introduce our 21st Jedi cohort. I'm very excited about that. Something I didn't get to plug earlier, and just sort of thinking about journey, being a part of people's journeys. So as the co-director of the program, so we're getting ready to do that. It's just wonderful things. That's with Bucklin, the American Evaluation Association. Excited about things with the LGBTQIA plus affinity community. Yeah, that's what I got going on.
Thank you so much for again spending your time with me. Good luck to this project. And this is the end of the episode.
Thank you for having me. Oh my goodness, like I got to talk about my story and where I came from and who I am. I love that. No, I love talking about me.
That's it for today's episode. Drop your thoughts in the comment section. I'd love to hear your take on the chosen keyword. Have a lovely time, and thank you again for spending time with Humans of Authenticity.